Thanks, Sue. All right. Well, we're going to go ahead and get started with this morning's coffee hour, which the title of is Travel, Imagine, Plan, and Go. And actually, I took that from our guests today, Barbara Freedman and Anne Zimmerman, who actually I've gotten to know quite well over the last couple of years. I took my first trip abroad to Italy a few years ago when I was invited to be part of a Aging in Place international conference, and Barbara was on a foundation that helped to fund that trip. And she reached out and offered to help coordinate a tour for my husband and I. We went in a few days ahead of time. And this past year, we had the pleasure of celebrating our 40th anniversary. We wanted to go back to Italy. And, I don't know about people, but I didn't know where to start in terms of planning that trip. And so I reached out to Barbara and said, would you help us? And I think what Barbara and Anne offer as part of Cornucopia Journeys is such a unique concierge package of services, but it was really about getting to know us and what was important to us, and then creating an experience that was important for us. And so I wanted to introduce them today and really share an opportunity to learn a little bit about the services they provide. And I know so many of our members really enjoy traveling, and I thought that they might benefit from learning a little bit about your services and really talk about some of the things I learned just in terms of being able to assure that things went smoothly, and if there were some bumps in the road, how we could course correct. So Barbara Ann, welcome. Thank you for joining us today.
Invitation.
Thank you, Lynn. I will kind of start and just let people know that I have had the pleasure of living at Kendal in Hanover, New Hampshire now for 11 years. And our business is just finishing its 10th year. So this was an effort that Anne and I put together actually as a result of bringing friends of ours together who we've known for well over 40 years between the two of us. And we had traveled together for milestone birthdays, 40, 50, 60. And at our 60th birthday celebration in Boston, where there were about 20 people there, and everybody said to Anne, well, we think that we need to plan our 65th birthdays in Italy because we want to know why you moved there and why you've stayed there and have never come home. So Anne and I looked at each other and we sort of said, okay, well, we'll see. And we spent the better part of the fall of 2012 going and investigating places to stay that would be appropriate for this particular group of people. And in the process of doing that, both of us were at a sort of transition in terms of the work that we were doing at that time, and said, we can do this. Why don't we do this? Because it seems to make sense. One of us is in the States, one of us is in Italy, and both of us have traveled extensively throughout Europe. We've been very lucky to be able to do that in our lives. So Cornucopia Journeys was born, and we're just finishing, as I said, finishing the 10th year in business. And our approach is extremely personal. There's an awful lot of information available online and all other places about taking trips and going in groups and doing large elaborate kinds of travel experiences. And we don't work that way. We want to know what you want to do. We have a process which takes place that is a introductory process for who we are and what we do, and then we reach out to the client and talk to the client individually and prepare a proposal for the client based on what it is that they have told us that they want to do. What's important? Is it art? Is it food? Is it cooking classes, or is it free time? Is it, you know, sitting and staring at the beach? What is it that you really want to do? And then we put together a program which we present to the client, and then they tell us whether we've gotten to the point where it makes sense and they like what we've done. And then we go forward from there. So that's very sort of quick synopsis. And Anne may want to add something at this point.
What's really important when we talk to clients is that they are in touch with what they want. Because as I'm sure you can imagine, if somebody wants to go to Rome, for instance, there's such a wide variety of things to see and do and know about Rome that if you have a week or 10 days to spend in Rome, or even 3 days to spend in Rome, we need your help so that we can prepare a proposal that really responds to what it is you want to do. Do you want to go to the Vatican? Do you want to see underground Rome? Do you want a cooking class? Do you just wander all the monuments that are known? Do you want a tour of extraordinary architecture? There are literally hundreds of options, but it all starts from you and from what you want and would find the most engaging. So, and we work with a network, not just in Italy, we work all over Europe. We also do Panama, because my brother lives in Panama and I've been there a number of times. And we do New England and the East Coast of the US, and we've begun to spread out from there. So, but we have a wide network of guides in all of those locations who know and love their territory and who are qualified to talk about it and have been educated in the history, in the art, in the cultural development of their area, and can best put you in touch with that. Because it's not really about going from monument to monument to monument. It's about getting in touch with the culture of the place and understanding what it means to live there and how they came. We just came back from a trip with people from Kendal and Hanover to Sicily. And it was important to us to give them a true feeling of the extraordinary culture that is Sicily. It is a very layered and complicated culture. And in order to do that, we reached to cooking classes and archaeological digs, and we had a lecture on the Mount Etna volcano, and we had a folkloric evening of local Sicilian music, and all of these experiences together provide you with a real feeling of the culture. And that's the hope, that you come away not only with memories, but a true understanding of the place you visited.
I think that one of our parts of our process actually comes at the end, when we send an evaluation to our clients and ask what we did well and what we could improve upon, and what were their favorite parts of the trip. And so very often people will say that our guides particularly are exceptional. And I think that that's something that develops over time. But these folks now have been working with us for quite a while, and people are in Sicily, for instance, is a good example. We had local guides for the towns that we were in. So we had an overall guide for 2 weeks for the whole trip, but we actually the guides, as Anne says, have a great network, and they work together to make sure that when you arrive in a town, and in Sicily, some of these towns are you know, extremely, they're different from one another, and their historic differences come out. So the local guides, when we got the responses back from our evaluations, the people who were with us in individual towns were very prominent in the evaluations, because they, as Ian says, they're passionate about where they live. They know about where they live, and they know way more about where they live and how they can help you understand it, than if you were just on a group trip that has one guide that is with you for the whole time, but that particular individual, if she or he is trained to be with a group, but not necessarily trained in what it is that is happening in that town. So people are very happy and come back to us with that often.
What else can we tell you? I have been living in Italy for 32 years and have the advantage of being able to visit a lot of the places that people visit. We feel very strongly about not putting people in places one of us hasn't stayed at or seen or gotten personal, really good reviews back from people we trust. So, you know, it's not a matter of just sort of choosing a 3-star or 4-star or 5-star hotel. It's a place that we know and we can recommend. So I'm very fortunate because that means I get to travel around it. Check places out.
I would say those things, you know, stood out for me on our trip for sure. The guides, we did the ruins of Pompeii, and the woman who toured us, or even in Naples, the gentleman, you can see the passion and the culture that they've lived in, they've immersed themselves in, and they can share experiences and bring it to life in ways that, you know, I think the ordinary person wouldn't otherwise see. And I think those are some of the most unique experiences we found on the trip. Tell me a little bit about, you know, I think for so many of us traveling after the pandemic, or, you know, I don't think we'll ever be away from COVID now, but how has it changed for you? How have you seen people re-engaging in travel? I know that every flight we took was completely full. And, you know, people didn't have to wear masks. They could if they wanted to. We certainly did. It was, you know, life has changed for all of us, I'm sure. What have you seen? What's changed since the pandemic? How has your business been impacted? And how are people responding to travel these days?
We have, we've just actually finished compiling what we do at the end of every year. We send a newsletter to clients and to our vendors and the contacts that we have in the industry. And it's quite remarkable. I mean, when you're in the middle of doing it, which we were all year a lot, you don't really realize that you're doing what you're doing until you see it all on paper and you went, oh, I said, wow, I can't believe we did all that this year. So there was no question that the great travel experience has resurfaced. People are so anxious and wanting to go. I mean, they just they were pent up for a long time. And I think that what we saw as the year progressed from the beginning of 2022 to now, of course, as restrictions were lifted, the difference mostly in attitude. It's more, I mean, there is obviously people are trying to, certainly in Europe and here in the States too. I see it in New England because we have brought people here as well. People are trying they're not trying to forget the the pandemic, of course, but they are trying to figure out the right ways to get beyond it, and provide an experience that is similar to what would have been experienced prior to COVID. I think from our perspective, we just logistically, if you will, we've added some verbiage to our documents, our travel contracts and documents, et cetera, that are very specific now to the fact that people need to have, they have responsibility for their own behavior, and they need to, they need to be cautious, and they need to be careful, and they need to understand where they are and feel comfortable doing what they need to do to feel safe.
And I think the interesting thing is that it seems to me, at least from this year's clients, they're even more appreciative of the experiences they have had, or at least they're more expressive of their appreciation of the experience they've had than they've had in the past. Nobody's taking anything for granted anymore. They're just they're appreciative of the local people making their efforts to make them feel comfortable and give them an understanding of their local place. They're appreciative of the experiences. It's really palpable, that difference.
Mm-hmm. Have many of the restrictions been lifted in places, or travel restrictions, those kinds of things? What are you seeing across the world?
Everything seems to have been lifted, except there's still masks in hospitals in Italy, thank God. But everything else, at least here, has been lifted, and in most of Europe, those restrictions have been lifted.
And and Lynn, you were traveling almost at the same time that we were. You got home a little bit before we left, but on what I noticed, perhaps was the most prevalent in terms of protection, were masks in airports and on the flights. Not everyone was masked on the flights, and not everyone was masked in the airports, but that was really where the personal responsibility kicked in, and their personal comfort levels. The challenge that we faced in the travel industry, not unlike a lot of other industries, but ours particularly, was that people could not go for so long, and I mean, countries had restrictions, and countries were locked down, and the things that really impacted the availability of services, the availability of, I mean, restaurants had to close, small hotels had to close in Europe. I mean, places just nobody had ever figured out that this might happen. Of course, none of us had. So I think that people are finally just getting back to a point where they're continuing to try to staff up. Europeans are having the same difficulty we are in the States in terms of staffing, and I think that's important, because particularly in Europe and particularly in Italy, there's a tremendous pride in giving people good experiences and in giving people the sense that they're important. And they're important, if you go and stay at a hotel, the hoteliers want you to have a good experience. And I think that the challenges for them that are lingering have to do a lot with staffing and figuring out how do they once again provide what it is that they think people are expecting.
Yeah, that's my customer service, though, was top priority for anyone. They were, wanted to please, wanted things to go well, and that was really clear. But I would agree, a few months ago, we had a staff person that traveled to Ireland. His brother was studying abroad, and he couldn't come back because he tested positive for COVID, and he was delayed probably a week in Ireland, and had to stay behind. His family boarded the plane and left, and he had to stay behind in quarantine for a week because he was positive. And so it wasn't long after that, I think, that things started to lift, but it can make travel very precarious, and it's something you didn't plan for for sure. And then not feeling well and being stuck alone in a country can be a very difficult and challenging situation. So, one of the things that we talked about earlier was trip insurance. And, I think for so many of us, there's an automatic, you can insure your flights. But can you talk a little bit about what people can do to ensure, when you're planning a trip like this, it's an investment of resources and something you putting everything into, and then COVID comes along or something happens, and weather, whatever might change circumstances, and a trip is canceled. Can you talk a little bit about things that people can do to protect themselves as they're planning?
Sure. I have had a real relationship with trip insurance for many years, long before Anne and I ever started this business. Very quickly, my husband and I went for a very short vacation, which we thought was a real simple, easy thing to do, which was to, get on an airplane and go down to Cancun in January, just to get out of the New England winter and get into the sunshine. And the very first night we were there, we went to a lovely restaurant for a beautiful dinner. And my husband did not see a step, and stepped where he thought there was a flat a floor, and it was a step of about 8 inches, and he went straight down, and he's very slender, and broke his hip and his femur the very first night that we were there. And we had travel insurance, which we always carried, just because we always felt as though it was important to do so. And he was there in the hospital for 2 weeks with full surgery, private room in a hospital in Mexico, and the entire thing from start to finish, the entire thing was covered. So that led us to continue to be proponents of travel insurance. Travel insurance is made up of a lot of different components. There's trip interruption, trip cancellation, baggage protection, there's a repatriation expense. If you have to be returned to your home, if you're seriously ill and you can't be treated in country, then you have to be returned. That is part of the travel insurance package. And there are a number of different companies that offer travel insurance nowadays. Often now, even when you book a domestic flight, you're going to see at the end, when you get ready to book your flight, they will offer you the opportunity to purchase travel insurance. I think perhaps one of the maybe the roadblocks for people, I don't know, is cost. Because if you look at a trip that's, I don't know, you're spending $8,000 on a trip to go to Europe, and then on top of that, you're going to be spending whatever the cost is, $900. You look at the cost and you think, oh my God, I've just spent so much money to go, and I don't want to, spend extra money to cover it. But that protects you from all of these various different incidences that can happen. And it's definitely an investment, but it is part of the investment of your trip. If you're going to invest that much money in a trip that's going to be going, taking you to far away places, it's just part and parcel of the built-in costs that you need to remember to build into your trip. I mean, we had 15 people in Sicily, last month, and our flight was canceled to come home. So we had to scramble and get everything organized, and did so, and got everybody back with no problem. And that is called trip interruption. And I'm now in the process of helping folks apply for the travel insurance that it covers the last night that they had to spend, any meals that they had, or taxi experience, whatever they had to have. So I mean, it's not a huge amount of reimbursement, but it definitely reimburses them for their full cost of that extra day and a half that they had to stay.
Right.
We also
so critical.
We also had a couple who had to cancel right before the trip because of COVID, and their
Mhm.
costs have been totally refunded.
Oh, that's great. That's so important. I know I took my dad went on a trip. He had a Legionnaire's travel insurance, and I asked him, "Well, why don't we just cancel this, Dad? You're really not traveling that much anymore." And he said, "No, I've been paying for that for a long time. I'm not gonna cancel it." And he took a trip to visit my aunt in Florida, and he had a fall, broke his femur,
Mm.
and not only paid for him to come home, he had surgery there, but then needed to come home for rehab, but they flew a nurse home with him.
Mhm.
And, the whole time my dad saying, "See, I told you." Like, "Okay, you were right. I'm gonna write this one down. You were right for sure, Dad." But, it was amazing. Things I'd never thought of. I thought, "Well, I can get him home." I would never have been able to do that on my own, but, it certainly is such a critical component when you think about the cost as opposed to what you've just invested in a trip like that. So tell us about, what are your favorite places? If you were planning a trip and had no idea where to go, where are your favorite places to go? What would you recommend? Barbara, let's start with you.
Ugh. Okay. Well, I vacillate very often between France and Italy. I love France, and I love the history, and the sort of elegance of the French countryside, and the cities and small cities. I love Paris, but I'm totally drawn to Italy, and partly because, of course, Anne and I have known each other for, I don't know, I'm not going to tell you how many years, but since she's been there for 32 years, I've been there a lot. And I love again, the history, the art, the sense, actually, in Italy more so than in France, the sense of um, in-depth engagement of the people who live there. Um, uh, as well, and I'll tell you just a brief story in a second, but the sort of sense that there is a joie de vivre in Italy that doesn't exist in this country anymore. The whole sense I mean, having people over for dinner, and having dinner last from 7 at night until midnight, and most of what that is not only good food but intense conversation. I mean,
And
in-depth
laughter.
conversation, and well, yes, and laughter. I think we've kind of, in this country, kind of lost that sense of um, uh, that way of living, that when you sit down to dinner and you finish dinner and you have to go do something, or you sit down to lunch and lunch is at your desk, or if you go visit relatives, you've got 6 other plans after your luncheon, so you don't really stay, you don't really absorb people. And I feel like in Italy, that is still part of the culture.
Mhm.
You have a sense that people really want to know about what's around them, what's happening in the world, about each other, how
Mhm.
how your life is going. In years when, and I will, Anne can tell you a little bit more about this because it's very cool, but in the years when she first moved there, and she and her husband lived in a different place than they live now, I have been at dinners where there were 5 different languages being spoken, and
Mm.
you all ultimately did understand what each other were saying in very different ways, and those kinds of experiences you just don't have in the United States anymore.
Right.
So I my feeling is, if I had a place to just go or live or whatever, if my world was a different world, that would be something that would really appeal to me about Italy.
And that is really why I'm still here. That lifestyle, which I came from New York, where I had been working in theater on Broadway and elsewhere, and in theater management. And that work is so intense. And in the theater world, nobody ever talks about anything but theater. Theater is the only thing that existed. And I got to Italy and I sat down at the dinner. I met my husband almost instantaneously and sort of melted into that lifestyle. He was an artist and he lived in a house built in the 10th century, no electricity, no running water, and a road like a riverbed going up to the house. But it was a magical place and people would come from all over. He had artist friends from many different nationalities, which is why at dinner, Barbara would be talking to people in various languages. And it was a revelation that people's conversations were about so many different things and in so many different aspects of life. And their perspective on life in Italy and where they came from and what was there, it was a revelation. And I am forever grateful that that happened. I am very lucky that that happened, and I am very lucky to still be here. I love all of Italy. I've been to many places in Italy. The one place that I take every opportunity to go is Venice. I am in love with the old lady. And especially in the evening hours when you can wander the byways without all the day trippers and see the real Venice. It is entrancing. But that said, I would go back to Portugal in a heartbeat. I love Porto. I just think Lisbon is lovely, but Porto is special. I would go back to the south of France. I have relatives living in the south of France, so that's relatively easy for me. I would go back to Ireland. I didn't like their weather much, but I found the people extraordinary. There are so many wonderful places to go. There are so many places I have not been. So I should really take the opportunity to go someplace new instead of going back to places that I know and love. But every time I go somewhere, whether it's a place I know or a place that I've never been, it widens your horizons.
Yeah.
My first trip to Europe, I was 17 years old. And I went with the Experiment in International Living, which is now called something completely different. I can never remember what. And I lived with a family in France for 2 months. And that experience of opening your eyes to the world and seeing everything from a totally different perspective still enthralls me and still happens to me all the time, every time I travel.
Yeah.
I think this might be interesting to those people who are listening in. As I was, I'm starting to prepare for a possible client. I'm starting to do some research, which is part of what I do in this particular partnership. But I came across an article which was written on November 1st. So it's very recent. It's very new. It was in Condé Nast Traveler. And the title of the article is Trending Destinations U.S. Travelers Are Booking for 2023. So I was so fascinated by this particular list, I had to write it down, and I want to share it with you because it's really, it just sort of, as Anne was saying, there are just so many places to go and see. But this one is particularly interesting to me. This is the list: Paris, Fiji, Istanbul, the Florida Keys, Lisbon, Montenegro, Sydney, Australia, Copenhagen, Woodstock, Vermont, which is 20 minutes from me, and Mexico City. Now,
Wow.
that is an extraordinary list. And Condé Nast Traveler, of course, is one of the resources that we use quite a bit. What I just went, wow, people are starting to travel, definitely, but all over the world. I was interested that there are no Asian locations on this list,
Mhm.
which
Yeah.
I don't know that that means anything one way or the other, but that was fascinating to me.
Yeah. Someone added a comment. There's an amazing documentary with the actor Stanley Tucci. Actually, I've seen this, called Searching for Italy, a great inspiration for a visit to Italy. It can be seen on the CNN website. Have you all seen that?
I have
Stanley
not
Tucci.
seen it. I guess I can stream these things, but I certainly don't have access to that or his cooking show either on my television. So
Yeah, he's
No,
got
I
a
haven't seen that particular one.
yeah. How about let's open it up to folks. Anyone have any questions or comments? You can type in the chat or the Q&A if you have any questions for Barbara or Anne. How did the trip, besides the canceled flight coming home, how did the trip with the residents from Kendal at Hanover go? Did you have a great time?
we had a fabulous time, and some of those experiences that we try to insert into people's trips that are particular really resonated with the Kendal travelers. One was a visit to artisan shop in Ragusa, where they make the famous Sicilian carts. People were enthralled by that visit. We had a folkloric evening of singing and dancing that also engaged the audience, that people just loved. We had a great cooking class with somebody who really in Taormina, who really was charismatic and really good at involving people and giving instruction. We had a chocolate demonstration in Modica, because the chocolate in Modica is very different than chocolate that most. These things really grabbed people, and as I said, those are ways into the culture, so that you can understand something of. One of the things was there's Sicilian puppets are very particular and famous, and there are 3 or 4 families that do them, and there's one in Syracuse in Ortigia, and we went to their museum and learned all about the history and culture of the puppets. We saw them puppets being made, we saw the puppets being manipulated backstage, and we saw a performance. That is such an incredible way to understand the history of these people, because those puppet shows, sort of like operas with their ridiculous plots, however, really explain the history of Sicily. So that those kinds of experiences, in addition to going to Agrigento and Piazza Armerino and seeing Ragusa and Modica and Palazzolo Acredi and Syracuse, those visits with guides who could explain the history, particularly in the Baroque part of Sicily, which was devastated in 1693 by the earthquake and rebuilt, which is why it's called Baroque Sicily. It gave people an overall, not just the history, not just the archaeological find, not just the food, which is a really important way into the culture of a place,
Right.
but all of it together gives you a very dynamic picture of the culture and feeling for what you are seeing and what you take home with you.
Yeah, that's so.
I would just insert that the actual travelers who came from Kendal at Hanover, with I think 1 or 2 exceptions, everyone was over 80, and almost all of the people that were on this trip are lifetime travelers, people who have been all over the world and all different kinds of conveyances, etc. And many of them, actually, I think with the exception of 3, had not been to Sicily at all. It was never a destination for that had been presented to them. They were absolutely remarkable in their ability to get around and be comfortable with lots and lots of walking, a lot of inconvenience, certainly coming home. I mean, we had a really tough, not tough is the wrong word, it's just scheduling was really bad when we had to rebook the flights to come home. So we had a 7-hour layover in Rome Airport, which was from 2 o'clock until 9 o'clock in the morning. So, I mean, you know, that wasn't pleasant, but yet everybody just sort of, you know, flowed into each experience. And we had, you know, we had no illness, we had no issues with, you know, people not being able to keep up. I mean, we just were very fortunate that this was a particularly a lively and engaging and engaged group of folks who came with us on the trip. So it was not onerous. The travel, I'm not crazy about being on an airplane for 8 hours from Boston to Rome, but it was, everybody, you know, it just sort of just did what they wanted to do. So it was great.
And what
That
my
sounds
favorite thing
cool.
was their first question upon return is when and where is the next trip?
That's always a good testament. That's a good one. That's what my husband said. When do we start planning the next trip? That's what he said as soon as we were
We're
on
ready.
the plane. We're ready. Okay, let's see. When looking at a travel insurance, is there a list resource that can be made available to point out what to look for, questions to ask?
I think the very best way to do it is to just go online and look at there. I would recommend that somebody go online and look at 2 different locations. Probably the 2 biggest travel insurance companies in the world. One is Allianz, and that's ALLIANZ, and the other is a company called Travel Guard, which many of the group travel companies use. And you can, it's a wonderful, both of those are very good sites for comparison shopping, if you will. I mean, you know, there are various different levels of travel insurance, and you can take basic, you can take one trip, you can sign up for, if you're a big traveler and travel a lot, you can sign up for a year. But those sites have very distinct descriptions of what the coverage is and how much it costs. So I know that sometimes maybe the internet can be daunting, but those are 2 basic websites that you can go in and check.
Yeah, I think in our situation, I purchased the flight insurance when I booked my flights, and then just went back to the company and asked if they would insure the whole trip, and they did. And I think we used Alliance, if I'm not mistaken. It was fairly simple and straightforward, but definitely worth the investment. So if someone is listening today and they wanted to learn a little bit more about your services and how to engage with you, even to begin thinking about or planning a trip, what would the first step be for them?
I'm writing our website information on the chat.
Okay.
That's a place where you can read about what we do, how we work, and a little bit about each of us, and what people say about us. And we have not yet updated the website for the last part of this year's trips, but it's updated until June, I think. And I think, you know, one can be skeptical about review quotes, but we tried to cover all aspects of the kinds of services we provide in their quotes. I am very pleased to say that in the 10 years we have been in business, we have not had one bad review. Have we had trips where things have gone a little awry? Of course we have. Life is not perfect. But for the most part, we have very happy customers, and we are very happy to say we have a lot of repeat customers. So I think the most important thing is to look first at our website and see what it is we do and how we work. And then if you're interested, you contact us. And the first thing is that Barbara will call you, because I'm not going to call you from Italy, but Barbara's going to call you from the US and talk to you about what it is you're interested in, and see if we go forward from there.
Yeah, there's on the website, there's a contact us sheet. You click on contact us and it just asks for where do you want to go, and your preferred contact information. That's available for anybody who wants to do that. But I agree with Anne. The website is the best with not just us, but any time that you're going to consider what you might want to do if you're going to travel. You should use the internet to the degree that you can, because it just helps prepare you for conversations that you're going to have, certainly with us. We're going to ask you a lot of questions.
Yeah.
Or I will.
Oh, and those questions are really what helps you to kind of sort through what's important to you. And I appreciated the opportunity to sit down and talk, and we weren't sure exactly what we wanted. We had an idea, but not exactly sure. And I thought the knowledge and expertise you had helped guide us in being able to make the decisions. And we didn't regret one thing we did. Every single step of the way, it was perfect. But I would say one of the things that I really appreciated was that once we were there, we had different questions, and I could reach out at any time. And in particular, Anne was right there. I felt like you were close by, Anne. I don't know that you were necessarily that close, but it was perfect, because there were things I hadn't thought of until we got there that I could send a quick text or an email, and the guidance along the way. And there weren't any missteps. We had as you talked about the guides, and I know you use the same company, but we had Manuelo, who drove us from Naples all the way back to Naples on our last day. And he was wonderful. By the end of the trip, felt like family. And, I think so many of the places that we went to were places we would never have known about otherwise. They were out of the way, not the regular tourist kind of scenes that I think most people would encounter, but they were really just intimate opportunities to be part of the culture. And that was what we appreciated so much, was just actually being part of the lifestyle in Italy and experiencing that firsthand. So I couldn't recommend these two people more. It was such an incredible experience, and I wanted to share the opportunity. I think this is such a unique business that you offer. And, I think taking these kinds of trips are an investment and of, time and money, and so much that we want to experience, and you help make that all come to fruition for us. So I wanted to share that with others and give them the opportunity to learn about your services. So thank you both for joining us today.
Thank you for your very kind words, Lynn. And
It's my pleasure.
it's excuse my office assistant here to comment. It is a pleasure to work with people who are so engaged in the process of developing the journey. They don't just sort of sit back and wait for us to propose. And I have to say that is a great pleasure, because it helps us provide a trip for you that really responds to what you want to see and do, and what you want to bring back as memories. Memories that are important.
I also would like to emphasize, just before we get off, that one thing we haven't addressed is planning time. And it is really important, if you are someone who is thinking of doing anything abroad, particularly now at the end of a year, at the end of this year, which it's been so incredibly busy. We really need 6 months minimum to plan a good trip for you. And it's not something that if you just decide, oh gosh, I want to get out of here and I want to leave on February 1st, that's not going to be the best experience that you'll ever have. So, and you'll see that there is a lot of reference in the things people say on our website about planning, and time to plan is something that we really feel strongly about, and we can do our best work for you. But we're glad to have had the opportunity to talk to you guys today. Certainly we are very happy to know that that there are people out there, particularly who are associated with Kendal, who might want to do this just as Lynn did.
That was a great opportunity. Thank you so much for joining us today. I appreciate it. And thanks to all of our guests for joining us as well. And happy holidays, everyone, and enjoy some travel in 2023.
Thank you.
Thank
Take care.
you.